Hey everybody, so this has been quite the disappointing day. I had it set up where I was gonna get a couple of my friends from some conferences that I went to come and do a show with me and talk about really the impacts of COVID-19 on like the American public and society in general, kind of how we're all dealing with it, and maybe some of our concerns going forward during this time. And that all failed because technology kind of hates me. So you're going to get me rambling on for a bit about this. So my apologies, things fell through. And that's partially my fault for not testing the equipment that I'm using currently. And yeah, so as we all know, COVID-19 is just going around everybody. It's kind of in the back of everybody's minds or in the forefront of everybody's minds as the country is going through this pandemic and the world in general is going through this pandemic together. And I think there are a lot of foreseeable problems that can be caused by this that are not just simply, limited to death or disease. Like right now, currently, the U.S. is number one in cases with I think over 83,000. And I'll be the first to say a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I said, hey. I don't really know why anybody cares, because we had around 3,000 cases in a country with 327 million people. And I was like, statistically, why does anybody give a shit at all? Um, of course, that was probably callous of me, and I was being dumb because I didn't see it, but I was like, whatever, it's not going to hit us. And I think the reason why I'm saying that was because I was trusting that Americans would, practice social distancing, wash their hands, be sensical. And that, of course, didn't happen. This is America, and I should have just known better. Um, but I think going forward, one of the biggest problems I can see happening from this COVID-19 pandemic is you have the Democrats, for the most part, making this a political issue. You have them trying to push forward certain legislations. I think there was a representative, I forget his or her name, saying, I think a week ago, was caught on a hot mic saying, hey, we can pass whatever we want right now because this is going into an effect. And apparently that's been caught by some of the people overlooking legislation that's being put forth and saying, haha, nice try, we're not putting that one forward, or we're not passing that, because you're trying to put policy in there and not really talk about the overall picture. And I think you're getting this issue with a lot of the states where the governors of said states are not doing their jobs well and or correctly. Andrew Cuomo, big man Cuomo, whose brother works for CNN. If you ever want to see some pure comedy, there's a video about them talking about curfew, and it was the Cuomo brothers just arguing like children over the fact they didn't like one of them uh didn't like the word curfew, and it was like, dude, you went on a nationally recognized news station to bitch at your brother for using the word curfew. That CNN, you have no credibility anymore. That's Thank you for the comedy though, but you have no credibility. You and Fox News are kind of both in the same boat with that one. Um, so you have these governors, specifically Andrew Cuomo, saying, "Hey, like Cuomo said a couple weeks ago, we need 300,000 masks. Things are just going to hell in a handbasket here, and we implore the federal government to just give us maximum assistance." And I think that Trump's rebuttal was excellent in this case. I think he was asked about it, and he kind of said that's up to the governors. That's up to the governors to determine what they do in their own state, and the manufacturing of their own, um, medical, oh damn, what's the term? Resources, which is correct. States have their own money, they have their own budgets, and they determine what they put that money towards. I think a lot of these things are just these governors are not being responsible with the funds they are given. They have not been responsible in the past with things. Um, I'll give you an example that I recently just saw in an article online and heard about as well over the radio. That a couple of years ago, I believe it was the CDC, and this is, don't quote me on this because I am still shaky on the party that kind of came up to Cuomo, and they said, hey, if another epidemic happens, I think this is after the last disease freakout we had. They said, hey, you're going to need to put some more money into your kind of relief fund for the state. If New York goes into a pandemic lockdown, this is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. This would be the epicenter, and this would be horrible. And Cuomo's response was, we're fine. I don't really want to do that. And lo and behold, a couple years later, we now have COVID-19, coronavirus, going around and ruining everybody's spring so far. It's also been discovered, and I think this was reported on Fox News. Unfortunately, I am using Fox News as a source here. I think it was on the Sean Hannity show last night. They stated, hey, yo, Cuomo, so you don't have any more masks? That's interesting, because they found, I think, a cache of around 3,000 masks that were not being used, right? So 3,000 is not 300,000, or not 30,000, or it was 30,000 was the original number that Cuomo threw out there. 3,000 is not 30,000, but the fact that you knew that they were there, and you just didn't use them, kind of just proves that you're not doing your damn job. At all. And that's just blanketly irresponsible. And so I think you're going to have certain states, mostly run by Democrats, which, to be honest, is no longer a surprise, just kind of devolve into heavily policed states, and states that are kind of turning into to God knows what. What I mean by that is, I think eventually they're going to start throwing people in jail who are found on the streets, who are not abiding by quarantine rules, and that's not that far of a stretch. I understand that this is an epidemic. I understand this is a pandemic going around the U.S. We need to take action, but I am very weary of the amount of power that some of these governors are exercising when it comes to how they are treating their individual state during this process. And I think this will lead to a change forever in the way that America deals with pandemics and how the society works and is run in general. I think one of the biggest things that I've talked about with a couple of my friends and mentors is that you're going to see a lot of people, I think, begin to go to school online. I'm currently going through that process, and I can tell you that process is absolute garbage. It's about as fun as rolling down a hill of glass and then stepping on fire. Okay, so it's not great. It's horrible. It's painful. It hurts. Please stop. Just because I think we were vastly underprepared for this. The university that I'm at and across the country, a lot of us have the same stories with how pathetic these things are being put into place and just all the problems we're running into. But you're going to see, I think, a lot of people begin to go to online school because they're realizing they can learn the same material online, not have to deal with some of the BS going on in person in class, and they can do for the most part, they can do their work at their own pace, which is great for them, good for them. So I think you're gonna see a lot of people start to go to school online, which is fine, and I think that'll definitely change. I think the price of colleges and certain services that are offered or not offered at universities will change because of this. And I think there will be an immense discussion about the exercise of power between the state and federal governments. The states are set up in order to be able to run themselves. That is why, like, the governor essentially is the leader of a state. They all answer to the federal government, but the federal government doesn't really come in when it comes to state affairs, like the state budget, or things like schooling, marriage, state infrastructure, not government infrastructure, but state infrastructure and state legislation and laws. Those things are made up state by state, governor by governor, and that's how that's supposed to be. Just in case the federal government were to ever collapse, the states are supposed to be largely autonomous and be able to run themselves without the overarching authority of the federal government. So this is kind of the small government argument here. And I think one of the things that you're seeing with people like AOC getting up a couple days ago, or as one of my favorite radio hosts calls her, occasional cortex, which I think is unfortunately very true, you have her getting up and yelling, just shrieking, saying, yo, none of this money is going towards illegals. And it's like, very, very well spotted. Aren't you just a legendary intellectual figure? Yeah, no duh. None of this money is going toward illegals. The reason being, is I don't know if you know this, but we don't have a responsibility to illegal aliens. We do not, regardless of the country they come from, whether it's Canada, Mexico, Australia, any country you throw out there. If you don't have a legal right to be here, we don't have a responsibility to you directly. We have more of a responsibility to our own people, to our own states, and to our own culture and our own society before we get to you. That doesn't mean that I think we should leave them to their own devices, because to an extent that can be an issue. But I don't think that we need to put that in the forefront, that we need to care for the illegals that are here, because guess what? They are here illegally, and I will 1,000 times out of 1,000 say, put the American citizen first, and then anybody else. So yes, we're not putting money towards the care of illegal aliens. No shit. Secondly, you have the Democrats complaining about the fact that certain states are running out of money, and the government's going to run out of money, and all these things are collapsing in on themselves, and then a stimulus package is put forward, a stimulus bill is put forward, and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats just shoot it out of the sky, like, immediately, which definitely just totally impacts a lot of, like, smaller businesses, because as I understand it, much of the legislation put forward in that bill was going to help out restaurants and small businesses that couldn't really stay afloat during their state's mandated mandatory quarantines or social distancing, or throughout this epidemic, whatever you might say. So you clearly see another example of Democrats not having the American people in the forefront of their mind, and really not caring about what happens, but then immediately turning around and blaming Trump for something that they themselves created and are contributing to. And this, I believe, will lead, especially with people like Pelosi, AOC, Cuomo, and everybody else getting up in arms and bitching about it. The Democrats are eventually going to cease to be a legitimate political force in America, because of how insane they are becoming, and because of how partisan they are becoming. And I know a lot of my friends who see this, and people who see this, are going to disagree with me, but I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I would hate America to become the country of the GOP. That would be garbage, and I would heavily oppose that. We need two sides who are equaling each other out, light and dark, if you will, blue and red, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. We need that dichotomy. and I don't want one to immensely overpower the other. I wish the Democrats would return to the Democrats of the '90s who stood up for personal rights, individuality, and free speech, and trying to not be insane, as they were in the '90s, and even before that, turning back into the more conservative Democrats, if you will, like JFK, who really did still have the American people at heart and weren't certifiably insane as Democrats are nowadays, because the Democrats are no longer centered around the ideals of democracy. I think a lot of times they've been taken over by the progressives and the regressive left, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but both are kind of working in tandem to just rip the Democratic Party to shreds. If you don't believe me, I implore you to look at what's going on right now between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. You have the regressive morons on one side who will willingly prop up a man whose brain is certifiably melting every second he opens his mouth. And then you have the progressive socialists who don't understand economics, who are getting up there and saying, hey, this is going to work for everybody, right? And I think that's an issue. I don't hold any malice towards socialist people in general. A lot of the people I actually do enjoy have a more socialist bent when it comes to enjoying listening to them. I think a lot of them just don't understand. But to actively kind of get up there and say, no, 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 we need to destroy the very system, i.e. capitalism, that gives us the ability to better ourselves, gives everybody the ability to better themselves, to create new technologies, and to fluctuate prices, and to kind of prevent uniformity where everybody has the same thing. We need to destroy that. Oh, and let me lecture you about that while I stand here with my Starbucks latte, my Nike shoes, and my AirPods. I think that's very interesting that y'all can't see the irony of that situation right there. But I think because of that, and because of the way that the Democrats are acting during this COVID-19 crisis, they're going to cease to be a legitimate political force in America, and if they don't, shut up and watch themselves. I think people who might be able to help when it comes to reformatting the Democratic Party are people like Tulsi Gabbard. I don't like everything Tulsi says at all. There are some and Andrew Yang as well. On both accounts of Yang and Gabbard, I don't agree with everything they say. Like, for instance, I think UBI is a retarded notion, and I don't agree with the general premise at all. Just because that will really impact our taxes to an insane amount. There's no way to get around that. I don't like some of Tulsi's more progressive bents towards things, or her legislation on the more progressive fronts, or her ideas for legislation on progressive fronts. But at least I don't think either of them are insane to the point where they can't see reason or talk to people on the other side. And I think that's the problem, is you got people now, Warren, Sanders, and Biden, who are either inept and dying, like Biden and Sanders, or people who are just lying, manipulative hacks, like Warren. And I'm not saying that's exclusive to Democrats. That also takes place in Republicans. Kind of looking at you, Chuck Schumer. No, Chuck Schumer. Damn, not Chuck Schumer. What's his name? This is gonna kill me. A total mental breakdown there. Mitch McConnell, looking at you. Also Chuck Schumer. You kind of suck as well, but that's not the point. So you have this going on, and I think that's going to lead to a collapse of our political system, and or too much polarization on one side. I don't want to become the country of the GOP, and I'll just say that, and I'll leave that you know, point there. I think also going forward, you're going to see um, many, many, many people that are going to be very displeased with how society changes when it comes to how how the federal government reacts to things. I think this could lead in the precise opposite direction that we want to go in. And what I mean by that is I think this could lead to too much government oversight as well, with the government is mandating a lot more of our health procedures under penalties. And I don't like that because that is the government putting their hands in one more thing they don't need to. Because as many people probably know, whenever the federal government gets involved, things inevitably get worse. And that doesn't matter what side you're on, whether it's right wing or left wing. Whenever the federal government gets involved, things collapse and fall apart. And I think this could really be a horrible turning point for America as a whole. I think that this could be, as I like to say, a historical shatter point. What I mean by that is a period or an event that that America goes through, or a country, or an empire, or a civilization goes through, that drastically changes the way things were before. That will inevitably also play into their eventual downfall. I had a discrepancy about this with my family. We were debating this and talking about this, and I said that I think this could be the beginning of the eventual kind of collapse of American influence in the West, kind of to where we just become a Western country, but not the Western country, not the greatest country, but just a country. Um, and that our American superpower is kind of going to rev down. And the reason because of that is, if you look at our economy is in shambles right now. I think as of a couple days ago, the Dow was at 1800, and weeks before that, it was still achieving all time highs. You have hundreds of thousands of people that are unemployed, and now they're competing with like the college kids or the high school kids who have their jobs, and they're competing all for like the same range of jobs. So this is like people who want to work at any kind of restaurants that are still open, grocery stores, pharmacies, gas stations, corner markets, things like that are still open. We have hundreds of thousands, and I know this from experience because I'm currently applying for a job. You have hundreds of thousands of people all competing for the same positions, because now the playing field's closed when it comes to the amount of jobs that are available, because a lot of businesses are being shut down due to the virus. So I think all of these things in tandem will really probably lead to another Great Depression. And as somebody who's young and doesn't have a career yet, I'm not terrified of that prospect because I have nothing to lose right now. I can't lose a career that I haven't had yet. But for people who are older, who are, my parents, even some of my older cousins, my grandparents even, and my aunts and uncles, they have careers, they have lives, they have, they're currently in their vocations and have been working in those fields for years and years and years. And if a depression hits and they lose their job, that is equivalent to them losing almost everything, because their career, at least for a period of time, is gone. Whereas I'm still building something, so I think us as teenagers and millennials will be far more malleable, and by malleable I mean flexible, when it comes to finding new ways of making money. Um, and kind of coming out on top still, coming out largely unscathed. So you combine the fact that we have a virus that just doesn't act like other viruses, like sticks to surfaces for multiple days, is even becoming airborne now, and is a new strain that really nobody's got a handle on, that we don't really have a vaccine for or really any effective medicine approved for it yet. You have that going around. You have the potential for eventual food shortages because you have people that are still kind of raiding frickin' grocery stores and just taking immense amounts of food and toilet paper. And it's like, what the hell do you need 90 rolls of toilet paper for? Like, that's so ridiculous, you know. But I think a lot of these things are happening, and eventually certain stores might not be able to get the right amount of stock in, and once that happens, they'll have their own internal issues and they might close down, right? This is all eventual. This will take place over the next several months. Then this also is not a guarantee this is happening. This is just all the things that I am currently worried about that I'd like to put forward to you guys. And I'm not saying that that's gonna happen. Once again, I'm gonna preface it one more time. Not saying that's gonna happen. But that has a potential to happen. And with all these things going on, I think you have multiple world players in the world stage that are looking at America who don't like us and haven't liked us for many decades, or in certain cases nearly a century, and saying, hey, the lion's bleeding, and the lion's kind of getting down and out, and the lion being us, of course. So why don't we hit them with things we've got? Once again, long form. Not saying it's going to happen, but I'm just saying that has a possibility now, and it's a bigger possibility because for the first time in hundreds and not hundreds, but I would say since pretty much the Great Depression, and before that with our isolationist policies, just basically the era of isolation, you have an America that looks fundamentally weak, right? And we are weakening and we are shrinking in the world's respect currently because of just how the American public is dealing with this, and how America in and of itself is kind of dealing with this. And that could mean that we are more that does mean that it doesn't it's not it could mean that does mean we are more susceptible to attacks from the outside now, you know. And I think that's something we need to watch and look at in the following months. And I'd like to also point out that if the economy remains closed, there is no way in hell America can survive a couple of months with our economy shut down. If the economy is closed and we don't start spending money, and then people will stop spending money, that's how we get massive depressions and become like Greece when it comes to just the amount of debt and ridiculous debt that we accrue to other countries and ourselves, because we start taxing people insane amounts, we start doing government controlled resources like healthcare, education, manufacturing, things like that. And as we know through an example with like the VA and the American government, whenever the American government puts its hands on anything it shouldn't, it breaks. And that doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that just always happens. And that's why I think that all these things in tandem really are going to come to bite us in the ass in a couple of months if we're not careful. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on everything. I hope you guys kind of enjoyed it. For any of you who are watching this all the way through, listening to this all the way through, thank you so very much. That means a lot. I'm really sorry. I had far bigger plans for this. It was going to be a recorded Hangouts call with some friends. And that really, really means a lot. And before I go, I do have some closing remarks by my friend who I shall term the Minuteman. He wrote in, unfortunately due to some legal issues, he is not available to appear in person or appear with his voice. So I will just kind of read off a couple of the remarks that he kind of had an issue with, which to an extent I believe in. I believe in and agree with. In certain countries, you have global technological surveillance that's kind of going into like looking looking at without kind of consent, okay, he's got the virus. No, she's got the virus. This person's exhibiting symptoms. This person's exhibiting symptoms. And that could lead to much more of a globalized idea of social credit, kind of like how in China you have the social credit system. I'm not going to go into that because that will make this video 20 or 30 minutes longer because it's just that horrible. Not that horrible. What is horrible? But that's just a really long topic to get into. And things like, when I don't recall which states, but I have heard this. So once again, do not quote me on this because this could be incorrect. You're getting opinion pieces from me today. You're not getting factual pieces. You're going to start getting much more factual pieces as time goes by and as I start doing article reviews and things. But today it's just kind of been thrown out of whack by certain circumstances. But you have apps and services that are being put out there to report people who are exhibiting what's the term? Damn, I was on a roll. Symptoms. And his concern, and I agree with this concern, is that could be used in a far more Orwellian way going forward in the West. So anyway, I would like to thank you, Minuteman, for that. Thank you for your remarks. I hope that inevitably we can do a show together. In time, I hope that all of you, like all 10 of you anyway, enjoyed this. And I'm really sorry for the quality of this. This is just kind of being put out last minute. But I hope y'all are fine. Stay safe and keep fighting the good fight, everybody.